So, are you paying attention to the insights that God opens for you, especially when you're going through a really hard time? Well, our next guest shares how to pay attention to those insights and how it can help you with very sad situations like grief.
Building spirituality, family, health, and business. This is The Giant Builders with Lois Wyant.
Welcome, Giant Builders. I'm so glad you joined us today, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Please remember, follow us on our social media. It really helps us out a lot. So today's guest is Vicki Paris Goodman. Hi, Vicki. How are you?
I'm great, Lois. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what you do and who you are?
Sure. I'm actually a retired mechanical engineer, but I don't feel retired because I'm really trying to get a message out there to help people. I also sing and play violin semi-professionally. I reviewed theater on the side while I was working as an engineer for over 20 years in Long Beach, California. I grew up in Southern California, but now I live in the mountains of central Arizona. And yeah, that's pretty much me. And I have a message that I am so grateful to you for inviting me so that I can put that message out there.
Okay, before we do that message, I have a quick question for you. What kind of
Sure.
songs do you like to sing?
I like to sing, with some exception, I like to sing stuff from Broadway musicals.
Oh, wonderful. All right.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about the message that you're passing on.
Sure. Well, it all started after my husband Sam passed in 2019. We had had a diagnosis 2 years before, a terminal diagnosis for him, liver cancer, and there was no chance he was going to survive it, according to all the doctors. So he did really well for about a year and a half, and then the last 6 months or so, he declined until he passed. And even though I'm a survivor type in general, not especially optimistic, not pessimistic, kind of middle of the road, but a survivor all the same. So I didn't expect to be devastated. I wasn't worried about my ability to go on with my life after he passed, but I thought it would be a pretty tough road. And I was pretty surprised when, on the day he passed, I was unexpectedly flooded with optimism. And I thought, oh, this is kind of unseemly, and my initial instinct was to push it away. But I thought, I was so strong during our 2 year ordeal, and I took such good care of Sam at the end when he needed taking care of, that maybe if good things want to come my way, maybe I should let them. And it was the best decision I could have made because a lot of really wonderful things happened after that. So, what I basically experienced, lest anybody get the idea I didn't grieve, I did. It was a combination of moving on immediately into that next chapter of life by trying new things, traveling to places I may never have thought to travel, things like that, while I processed what had happened to my life, along with missing Sam initially so much. So it was a real combination. And what happened also is I felt like there was help coming from somewhere outside of myself. I call it the helping hand coming from somewhere to guide me, not just into the next chapter of life, but to guide me into the proper activities and things to for me to embrace opportunities that came my way. I was being guided as to which ones to accept and which ones to turn away. I just felt there was all this guidance. And what really makes this kind of stunning is that I was raised very secular. And I remained that way through most of my adult life too. Some years before Sam passed, I've decided there must be a higher power, because it just didn't make sense to me that all of this that we see and experience could have just spontaneously happened. But after Sam passed, suddenly I wanted to know if he was still around in some form, and if so, where he was. The hospice we had used offered me meetings about once a month with their chaplain. And I said, yes, yes, I would love to talk to her. And so in our first meeting, me and the chaplain, I asked her, I said, tell me about the afterlife. And she did, but the best thing she did was she recommended that I read the story of a secular neurosurgeon who had had a near-death experience from a brain infection. His whole story is so divinely inspired because he had no way of getting the infection. He didn't have a wound of the type that you need to get it. His colleagues were in the hospital were taking care of him. They couldn't get the infection under control. He was going to die. His family should hope that he dies because otherwise he will live out the rest of his life as a complete vegetable because there has been so much damage to his brain from this massive infection. So he's in a coma for 7 days and he has this near-death experience. And when I read his story, I found it so convincing that that alone brought me all the way, almost immediately, from this rudimentary faith in something to fully believing in God and an afterlife. And so that is, in a nutshell, the story. Oh, the other thing I should mention is that I was getting all of these opportunities coming my way, which I mentioned, and also insights, the best of which came to me after I published my book. And I wrote the book 2 years after Sam passed. So the book is more of my experience, of what happened, the unexpected things that happened, to kind of be an example to others. The insights that came to me after the book, I put those in some audio episodes that I make available free online. And together, the book and the audio episodes that explain these insights so thoroughly, I think could start a movement to help people see death and loss and really all adversity in a completely different and much more positive way.
Well, that's wonderful. Like, expand for me on your book. Give me a little bit more information on what's in there.
What I did with the book, which is called To Sam with Love, a surviving spouse's story of inspired grief. And what I did with the book was I kind of divided it roughly into thirds. I felt that people needed to get to know, especially Sam, but me to a lesser extent, in order for his illness and death to have the most impact. Sam was a really extraordinary man, not accomplished particularly, but he was so disciplined philosophically and mentally. He always believed in doing the right thing, and I never saw him fail in any situation to do the right thing. So he was extraordinary in that sense. And he was also very funny. So, what I did with the first roughly third of the book is tell about Sam and a little about myself and our marriage. The middle third kind of takes us from diagnosis to Sam's eventual passing, and it's probably the most serious part of the book. And then the latter third or so is all the extraordinary things that happened for me from his passing onward. And so in that way, I my intent was to make it a really good example of a situation where you get a terminal diagnosis, your loved one passes, and look at what's possible.
You think, well, okay, going through grief obviously is really hard. How were you able to really embrace those insights to be able to accept them?
They just made so much sense to me. But remember, I wrote the book 2 years after Sam's passing, and then most of the insights came to me, the best ones came to me then. Things like, for example, is death really tragic? Why do we think of death as tragic? If you have that belief system, and I find that most people do, the belief system that says there's a loving God and a beautiful beyond words afterlife where you experience love that's so powerful we can't even imagine it here on earth. And that's been reported in countless near-death experiences. Then what's so terrible about death? In fact, seems to me it should be cause for celebration.
Mm.
If your loved one gets to go to this wonderful place and you know you'll join them there later, and in the meantime, God's plan is for you to learn more, experience more, and maybe even teach others. I see this as a wonderful thing. That's not to say that as human beings who don't like to face the unknown and uncertainty, your life changes pretty drastically when the person you loved most and shared your home with and your life with isn't there in the same way they were before. Yes, there will be grief, but it doesn't have to be so dour. It can be, okay, I need to make an adjustment here, a big one, because my life has totally changed. But let's do some really fun things while I process that. So I don't think I think I got off on a tangent telling about one of my best insights that I don't believe came from me, by the way. I think they all came from God, and I'm simply the messenger. So I'm not sure I quite answered your question,
No,
but
you did very much. Yes, you did. I phrased the question not really well, but what are maybe another insight that God gave to you? Because I love that one. I believe that especially we as Christians should be celebrating the fact that the ones that we love so much are with Jesus. I mean, that is, like you said, that is the most precious thing, your precious place to be. But we get too
but
caught up in our own sorrows of missing that person.
I also think there's a lot of expectation. I think we're culturally conditioned to awfulize death and loss. And even though I am finding more people like yourself, Lois, Christians who have this belief system, but that cultural conditioning is so strong that we don't connect the dots between we don't connect the dots that maybe that cultural conditioning is all wrong. We just accept it somehow, even though it's completely uh, anathema to our belief system. We never get that far in seeing that the two don't make sense together. And the cultural conditioning needs to be thrown out. And what's so great about that is you throw out that cultural conditioning, you ignore it, you say it's all wrong. What's great about it is it leaves us with the ability to see that death need not be so frightening, so tragic, that really what we're grieving is just that that person is not with us in the same way. And that puts an end also to the guilt so many people and the have tos, the shoulds, because a lot of people say, oh, I could move on. I could go join that orchestra. I could go sing karaoke, but maybe it's too soon. I don't want to do anything that seems wrong or that dishonors my loved one. And so they stay in grief longer than they might otherwise.
Mm.
Or it's not that they shouldn't be grieving, but they stay kind of in this cocoon of where they don't think they should allow anything good into their lives yet. And everybody has a slightly different idea as to how long that time should be. And now one other you asked me for another insight. Um, and now I forgot what it was.
Oh,
All right, well, we can move on. Well, one thing too is I started to talk about God's plan. If God has a plan for each of us, then one of the insights I was so blessed with was that, okay, this plan includes teaching us things. For example, I've always been kind of a type A personality. In fact, my second book that's in publication now is all about that, the type A personality. It's a little self-deprecating because I don't think, impatience and some of the other things that characterize a type A personality are particularly good things. So, but I realize now that God has been has been placing obstacles in my way my entire life to try to teach me about patience. And I've been just sort of reacting badly, each time he's done that. So he keeps putting these obstacles in my path that are going to cause me maximal anger, frustration, and impatience. And once I realized that he was doing this and that I need to learn this lesson and start paying attention to God's intended takeaways, suddenly I'm not getting those obstacles placed in my path nearly as often.
Mm.
I think God now realizes he can move on to teaching me something else because she finally got it. So it's kind of funny, but yeah. So when we face adversity, whether it's something trivial like, bad traffic, that's frustrating us, or something terrible, we lose a loved one, or our house burns down in a fire, or whatever it is, we're going to feel bad, of course, but we need to think about, what is God trying to teach me with this? And once you learn that lesson, good things can come. How these things that we think are so terrible, a lot of times they happen for the best because something better happens later, or we learn a lesson from it that's so valuable that completely changes our lives. Well, I think it's because of God's plan. And he has a different plan for each of us. So, that's one of the big insights too. These things were coming at me fast and furious. And you know how most of us, we have an enlightened moment, what, maybe once every 5 years or something. And so I thought, this isn't coming from me. This isn't me. Yeah, I've had moments of brilliance like everybody else, but not once a month. Yeah, this is what was happening after I published the book. In the meantime, I had tried all of these new things, new experiences I might not have chosen to embrace if Sam had lived. So I'm not in any way saying it's a good thing or that I'm glad that Sam passed, because I still miss him 5.5 years later. But my plan B, next chapter, that wouldn't have been my first choice, is pretty darn good. And I think people have to realize that there is a lot of opportunity in these situations when they lose someone. Okay, so it's not your first choice. At least take some comfort in knowing it was God's plan. And now what are you going to do with it? Do something good, and don't waste a lot of time feeling guilty or thinking that you have to slow down or completely stop your life for some period of time before moving on. Oh, so I remember now. So there are no negative emotions in the afterlife. How do I know that? Well, I don't know it 100%, but it makes sense because when I read the neurosurgeon's account of this love that is so powerful you can't possibly imagine it here on earth, it follows from that when you're surrounded by that kind of love, that purity of love, that you're not going to have any way anymore to experience anger or jealousy or any of those negative emotions. So people that feel guilty after their loved one passes about moving on with into another relationship, let's say, why? Your loved one is surrounded by so much love and so much understanding of the universe because they're at one with God and God knows everything. And the neurosurgeon says he knew everything when he was there. everything about math and science and physics and history. Doesn't anymore because, when he came back, his brain took over to be that filter or reducing valve that, that takes all that knowledge down into a manageable amount, when we're here on Earth as human beings. So from all of that, it just seems obvious to me there are no negative emotions. So this guilt people experience about moving on, they need not feel it at all. Their loved one only wants them to experience their best life going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you in that when like their house burns down or something bad happens, those are opportunities that God opens up for us to show how we can serve others and serve Him and just serve humanity and just be a reflection of what He stands for.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Mhm.
So yeah, and as humans, we are not going to be happy on the day our house burns down, but at least we might remind ourselves that some good is very likely to come out of this in the end, and that there are lessons to be learned, and we will grow and learn a lot about ourselves in the process.
So, who all do you think will benefit from your book?
I think the target audience for this book, I think anyone could benefit from it. But I do believe that the target audience is someone who's recently lost someone, or someone whose loved one is facing a terminal diagnosis, is still alive, but there's either no chance they will survive it or a good chance they won't. And those are the people I think if you fit into one of those categories, you will benefit greatly from my book and from those audio episodes that I make available for free online with all those, fantastic insights with which I've been blessed.
Oh, great. Well, we're going to have those listed below for all of our listeners so they can link into either your book and or your free one. So, Giant Builders, if you are enjoying this episode, please check out these episodes as well because they might like those too. So, any closing thoughts?
I actually have some tips for survivors of loss.
Oh, great.
I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I don't think I got all the way there. What one thing that I did that may not be obvious to everybody, but again, I was being guided, in a very special way. Um, I struck a balance between what I'll call activities and quiet time. The activities were these new things that I was doing, singing karaoke suddenly before Sam passed, I didn't even know I could sing. I rejoined the orchestra, I started making plans to travel to exotic places. I went to Antarctica, for example. So those are the activities, or just having lunch with a friend or going to a concert. Those are the activities. But you also need to process the loss and the changes, these abrupt changes that have occurred to your life. So the quiet time has to balance it out. And that would be, I don't know, just sitting quietly or reading a book or taking a walk or a hike, in order to, or listening to some music so that you can just kind of be. Because there are people who will tell you, I know because several told me, keep yourself as busy as possible so you don't have time to think or feel after Sam passed. And I instinctively knew that was bad advice.
Mm.
Well intended, but bad advice. I knew I needed to work out the feelings. And incidentally, one other thing I will say about this balance of activity and quiet time, the activities can be the most fun. But what I noticed is I'd come home and I'd feel empty inside. And I thought, oh, maybe because Sam isn't here to either have shared that activity with me or for me to tell him about it when I got home. So I thought, okay, there's nothing I can do about this. So things maybe will be good, but they won't be great for a while, maybe for a long time to come. But I didn't have any control over it, and I realized that. So I accepted it. And so that's the way things were for, let's say, a few months to a year after Sam passed. And it was good, if not great.
Oh, that was wonderful. That was great advice. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Wow.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. Well, I just appreciate you sharing so much with us, Vicki. I mean, you've been on a challenging but a beautiful journey, and I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate the opportunity to tell my story to all of you.
So don't forget, Giant Builders, I'll have links to her book and information below, so check it out. All right, and we'll see you next week. Bye, Giants.
Thank you for listening. This has been The Giant Builders with Lois Wyant.